All right, Magic Makers, we are going to talk about something that is really important. And we're going to talk a lot about bone health. And, once we hit that magic age of like 40s to 50s, our doctors start having more and more conversations with us about osteoporosis and the importance of keeping our bones nice and healthy and strong. And so, with that said, I am bringing on a wonderful doctor, Dr. John Neustadt, who is the king of osteoporosis. He's probably like, I'm not the king, but he is actually well cited for, and he's actually received an award for all of the citations that his work has been given. So he definitely knows his stuff because clearly if people are citing him, he's definitely on to something. So I wanted to bring someone on to really help you kind of give it from a doctor's perspective what osteoporosis is and really why we start caring about it. And so Dr. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, I I feel like for many people, like our doctors don't start having that conversation until we're in our 40s, right? That they start asking about our bone health, where, this is your thing. Should doctors start asking that question a little bit earlier?
That is a great yeah, that's a great topic, and it's not a simple yes or no answer for me. I mean, one of the challenges in clinical medicine, and frankly, why even people who are older and should be getting screened for osteoporosis, and it should be a conversation during a medical appointment, are not getting the treatment and the screening they need, is because most doctors are just confused about this
Mm,
condition, how to treat it, how to screen for it, what the testing results mean, which medications, if any, would be appropriate, diet, lifestyle, how to approach this holistically based on what the research shows strengthens bone and reduces fractures. So obviously it's my thing. I mean, this
mhm,
is this is my jam. I love bones, and I would love for people to have it as part of a conversation earlier in life,
mhm.
especially women in their 40s, even if it's just mentioned in passing. But
Right,
in a in a medical appointment, there typically is limited amount of time and multiple things that are
right.
going on that need to be addressed. And I wish it would become just part of a screening questionnaire in general. And
Yeah.
that could help take care of at least just raising the awareness. I think one of the
Mm.
biggest aspects of addressing this epidemic, and it is an epidemic, is awareness.
You're 1,000% right because I feel like, you know, osteoporosis isn't having the moment that menopause is. Like right now, I feel like, a lot of people are, celebrities are talking about it and all the challenges around it, but it's osteoporosis isn't getting that kind of glow up that menopause is getting right now.
You're right, and there are real considerations as to why that's the case. And one is it's asymptomatic. Typically,
Yeah.
there are no symptoms of your bones getting weaker until suddenly you break a bone and
Right,
you end up
right.
in the hospital. Second, there are no big campaigns around it in terms of ribbons or fundraisers or marathons like breast cancer.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
let me just tell you a few of the statistics around osteoporosis and why it should be in everybody's mind and why I hope it gets more awareness. I mean, first of all, when a woman goes through menopause, and for the 10 years after is the fastest rate of bone loss. So that's a
Wow.
real important time to be working on this issue. The most dangerous aspect of this disease is breaking a bone. If you're a woman with osteoporosis and you fracture a hip, there's up to a 36% chance that you're going to be dead within a year. And in fact, globally, osteoporosis is second only to cardiovascular disease as a health issue. And every 30 seconds, someone somewhere in the world is breaking a bone because of osteoporosis. A woman's risk of an osteoporosis fracture is equal to her combined risk of breast, uterine, and ovarian cancer. Osteoporosis fractures account for more days spent in the hospital than other diseases like diabetes, heart disease, and breast cancer. And if, God forbid, you have breast cancer and you fracture and end up in a hospital, there's an 83% increased chance that you're going to die compared to a woman with breast cancer who hasn't had a fracture.
Wow. I mean, you just threw out some numbers right now that I'm like literally I'm surprised my head is still on my shoulders. Like you're like there's no ribbons, there's no marathons. I'm like this these statistics uh, are valid for a ribbon, valid for like osteoporosis month because, I've always heard about women breaking their hip, but you think like when I'm 80, not
Right.
like in my 40s.
Right. And I think it's happening. And unfortunately, most people aren't getting screened for osteoporosis. And so we don't really know the true number. So
Right.
the estimates now are about 50 million Americans have osteoporosis or at risk of osteoporosis because they have some bone loss. It's primarily a female
Mm,
condition where 80% of cases happen in women, and most people think of it as something that happens to women in their 50s, 60s, 70s as they go through menopause and after that. But it's happening early and earlier, and a
mm,
big hidden cause of the destruction of bone and what's happening are medications.
ooh,
One of the most commonly prescribed medications for women are antidepressants, selective
yeah.
serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SNRIs, the other category, Wellbutrin, Prozac, those sorts of things. There are serotonin receptors on bone, and they activate the bone destroying cells called osteoclasts. And there are two metabolically active cells in bone. One are the osteoblasts and one are the osteoclasts. The osteoblasts build up and create new healthy bone, and the osteoclasts break down old worn out bone in a process called bone remodeling. And we need that. We need
Hmm.
that for healthy, strong bones. And in fact, about every 10 years, our bone is completely remade. We have all brand new
Oh,
bone. And osteoporosis is really a condition of imbalance where the
mm,
destructive forces are winning. Those osteoclasts are outperforming the osteoblasts. Well, there are lots of things that skew that push it in the direction of bone destruction and osteoclast activity. And one of them is those antidepressant medications. They are so potent at destroying bones that for a woman taking an SSRI, for every 19 women taking an SSRI for 1 to 5 years, we will expect one of them to fracture.
wow.
And that's just one of a long and growing list of
Yeah.
medications that destroys bone, like acid blocking medications, aromatase inhibitors,
Mm,
glucocorticoids. I mean, it's just the list goes on and on. So I think it's like really occurring in people younger,
right.
but they're not being screened for it, but they're at risk.
So let's go back for someone who's like, I think osteoporosis is a word we've heard of, but maybe we might not know the definition. So I'm big on making sure people understand like what a word means that you might hear in conversation or out in the Google land.
Great question. So the definition of osteoporosis is where you have bones that are getting weaker and it predisposes somebody to fracture. Typically, it is diagnosed by a bone density test that measures the mineral component of the bone, and it's given a T score and a Z score. So by definition, a T score measures your bone density to a somebody of your same gender, of the same race, who is in their 20s. So if I'm a 65-year-old uh, you know black woman, it would be my bone density, my T score would be comparing my bone density to a 20 to 29-year-old black young woman. A Z score, in contrast, compares your bone density to somebody of your own age group, and the diagnosis of osteoporosis is typically based on a T score. And that's getting a little technical, but it's important because I want people to understand that although that number on the test can give you an indication of what's happening to your bone, it's important on any test to ask the question, how well does it predict my fracture risk? Because
Mm,
the most dangerous thing about this disease is not whether there's a number on a test is
right,
low,
right.
it's whether or not you break a bone. And what we know is that for women with osteoporosis, a bone density test only predicts 44% of them who will fracture and only 21% of men. It's not a great indicator of fracture risk. It's one piece of a much larger puzzle. And unfortunately, typically that's all that's tracked. Your
Right.
bone density goes up and everybody's happy.
Right.
And the what happened with me about 20 years ago, not only am I a clinician, a doctor, but I'm a husband and a son-in-law. And I at some point I'm going to be everybody's a patient too.
Right.
So I
Right.
really empathize with the experience of people and try and understand how I can do a better job. And what happened is I was helping my mother-in-law who had osteoporosis, giving her some recommendations for diet, lifestyle, nutritional support. She was working with her medical doctor who'd prescribed Fosamax, and
Mm,
her bone density was going up. So her physician was happy. I was happy. She was happy.
right.
And then she tripped on a rug in her house and fractured her hip.
Ooh.
And I thought something's wrong with this picture. So I started diving into the research. And what I found shocked me. Not only that we've known since the 1990s that a bone density test predicts less than half of women who will break a bone, but that the bone density test really only measures the quantity of bone, the amount of bone, not the quality of bone, which is the bone strength.
Gotcha.
It only measures the minerals in the bone, but bone is a complex tissue like all tissues. It's made up of different things, the minerals like calcium, magnesium. That's just one part of the bone. There are 180 to 200 different proteins in bone, with
Wow.
the main structural component being collagen. Collagen is stronger than steel and it's flexible. You can
Mm,
take a chicken bone and soak it in vinegar, keep switching out the vinegar to keep it fresh. And after, 3 to 5 days, all those minerals are going to be pulled out of the bone. They're going to be gone. And what you're left with are those proteins and that collagen. And
mm,
the chicken bone is flexible. You can twist it, bend it, hit it against the wall, run over it with the car. It will not break.
right.
That's the power and the strength of collagen. And so it's really important to think of bone as a living tissue and what can we do to
Mm,
reduce somebody's fracture risk, not just by increasing the bone density test. That's one piece of the puzzle, but by helping to make bone quality better, helping to make bones stronger. And there are lots of things people can do that can stimulate those osteoblasts, those cells that produce healthy bone, to create more collagen, which, by the way, that's what the minerals bind to. The collagen is the scaffolding. The proteins are the scaffolding, and the amount of protein somebody consumes can account for 2 to 4% of bone mineral density alone, just through that part of diet.
so quick question. So, and it's funny because I think most people think I get this bone scan and they tell me, hey, you're rocking it. And you think, okay, and you walk away. So is there a test for fracture or is that not a thing just yet?
That is such a great question. There is no one perfect test, unfortunately. Clobbering together, somebody's risks and risk factors through various methods is currently the best way to understand it.
Mm,
In the research, what we know is most predictive of fractures is somebody's gait and mobility.
yeah,
Not their
yeah.
bone. It's the most consistent predictor of fractures
Yep.
because 95% of fractures occur because somebody falls. So anything we
Right.
can do to reduce the risk of falling, like strength training, building muscle, fracture proofing your home with
Right.
grab bars in the showers, making sure loose steps are fixed. That
Yeah.
that those sorts of things are really important. And there are what are called modifiable risk factors, non modifiable risk factors, and potentially modifiable risk factors. Now, the non modifiable risk factors, just that are risk factors for osteoporosis and fractures that none of us can change, are our age.
Right.
We're all getting older and fracture risks increase as we get older. The potentially modifiable risk factors include the medications. It may be
Yeah.
possible to get on a different medication that doesn't have the bone destroying effects, or talk to your doctor. Maybe a lot of people are on medications for years and don't have a medication review
Mm,
consistently. Getting a medication review is really important, not only from your doctor, but from your pharmacist, and seeing if there are any interactions, see if any of them destroy bones, but also speak with your physician or work with an integrative clinician who might be able to address whatever issues you're having and allow you to decrease the dose of the medication or discontinue them altogether.
right.
And then
Right.
on the modifiable risk factor portion, in terms of fractures and what can what can predict what is associated with increased fracture risk are diet, exercise, sleep,
Mm,
connection to community, which, all of that to me, and fundamentally, a lot of this is about mindset
yeah.
and helping to start doing those steps consistently day after day to move in the direction of health. And one of the things that I tell patients and that I write in my book, Fracture Proof Your Bones, is when people come to me, they typically they have the diagnosis and they have the bone density test result, and they're scared,
Mm,
and rightly so. It's a scary, dangerous condition that should be taken seriously. But I have people take a breath
mm,
and I reframe it, and I tell them that yes, it's serious, but it's not an emergency. I
right.
tell them about the limitations of that bone density test. And what I say is there's time to create a holistic bone health plan that makes sense for you. Now, that may include osteoporosis medication, but it may not.
Right.
It's ultimately up to the individual patient to decide what's best. And there's time to learn and put together a program that makes sense to attack this. But these are typically, this is a health issue that has taken, years, decades to create. It's not something that's going to be turned around immediately, and so that's why this sort of consistent effort, little baby steps, every day, moving in that direction of healthier bones. And when you're doing the holistic approaches, they also reduce your risk for heart disease, dementia, diabetes, obesity. I mean, it just goes on and on and on.
Now, so if I am given, the diagnosis of osteoporosis, I'm assuming there are different levels of of where you are in the disease.
That's correct. There's two general categories. One is called osteopenia, which is pre-osteoporosis. It means you have some bone loss, but you're not, you don't meet the diagnostic criteria. And that's from a T-score of -1 to -2.5. It's expressed as a negative, like
Hmm.
how far are you below, how much less bone do you have compared to somebody in their 20s? And then a T-score of -2.5 or lower, -2.7, -2.8, that is osteoporosis, and it's measured at different areas, typically the lumbar spine, the lower spine, and the hip.
Mm,
And yes, the lower the bone density, that does increase your risk for fractures. Like I said, there's, predicts, it has some predictive value.
right, right. And so, we talked about, I'm gonna circle back to the medications you talked about, but are there any kind of just the natural decline of female hormones that might be affecting our bones so that, when estrogen and progesterone and start to uh, slowly decline, is that a potential problem for osteoporosis?
It is absolutely a problem. So as estrogen declines and the female hormones decline as a woman goes through, perimenopause and menopause, that is the fastest rate of bone loss. That's when women lose bone the fastest for
Mm,
during that period and for the 10 years after. Supplementing with hormone replacement therapy is associated with about I believe it's a 40% reduction in fracture risk. And there is good evidence now for its safety. You need to be
yes.
screened for it to be done safe, but that it can be safe, done safely, and incredible health benefits, not only for bone and fracture reduction, reducing fracture risk, but also for cardiovascular disease, brain health, neurological health, and more.
Yeah. And so going back to the medications, a lot of the medications you just rattled off are medications that men take as well. So typically when you think of osteoporosis, the first person you think of is a woman. Now, given that men are taking Prozac and men are taking acid reducers and men are taking many of these other medications, is that now starting to become more of a challenge, or because of the makeup of men, they might
So
not be?
there's no studies that I know of that have looked at men on these SSRI medications and the risk for fractures, but there's nothing that I can think of that would lead me to believe that the effect on bones in men is different than the effect on women.
Right.
And so I believe it is definitely a risk.
Mm,
And we know that with other medications like prednisone. We also know in terms of hormones with men that low testosterone is a risk for osteoporosis and fractures. So I do believe that the risks are equal in men and women. And it's important to note also, even though that 20% of cases of osteoporosis occur in men, if a man does fracture, his risk for dying is higher than in a woman because
Yeah.
we tend to have as men more severe comorbidities, or we have other diseases that we're experiencing, and that the symptoms tend to be more severe. I do want to say though, in terms of menopause, and one of the things that's often missed by my colleagues is that a woman goes in, she's perimenopausal or menopausal, she has bone loss, and they just check the box and they decide, okay, yes, it's because of menopause,
And that's
and
it.
without doing any more analysis. And what the research shows is that 30% of cases of osteoporosis in postmenopausal women are due to other causes,
Mm,
not the drop in estrogen. So that is one thing, but there can be multiple things happening at the same time, and often there are. So that's
right.
important to understand as a patient, and I'm really passionate about educating patients to what questions can they ask, and that's an
Yeah.
important one. And so, I mean, I'm grateful that you've invited me on to talk about this so I can hopefully reach more people with these messages to help them.
And every doctor that I have on the show, is what you just said. Ask questions. It's like go in, and because most of us, you grew up and I got the white coat says whatever it is, you accept it and you walk out the door. And nowadays, if you said to me, Kim, you have menopause, and I have questions. I'm like, what does that mean? And I think, hearing from doctors like yourself who have seen it firsthand, you're like, your patient is going to walk out the door and they're going to Google it and they're going to have then 5 million more questions about the diagnosis that you just gave them. And
Right.
that there are, like you said, with menopause, there's 4 million other things that interweave into that. And there could be other underlying things that are happening that as a patient, I'm just like, oh, it's just menopause. And I walk away thinking that I'm good.
Exactly. And they're not. And like my mother-in-law, who thinks she's protected, and she
Right,
wasn't. And thinking you're protected and being protected are two different things.
right.
Which is why in my book, and many chapters in the book, there are take action sections at the end of it, with a list of questions to write down to ask your doctor. Make sure you go in prepared. And I'm an advocate of that. Of go in with your list of questions written down, because it's really hard
Yes,
during a conversation with a doctor to remember everything that's been answered, to all the answers, and also to remember what questions to ask. So being prepared, preparing for that appointment is a step that is cannot be underemphasized how important that is.
agreed, 1,000%. And I always encourage my women. I'm like, if you know in 6 months that you have a doctor's appointment, start a note on your phone and just start writing down any question that you think of, any symptom that has been bothering you. Think about it and write down how long it's been, because you want to be able to, you don't want to be dismissed because you're like, oh, I don't know how long it's been going. Like you want to be as factual as you can so that you
Yep.
can open up that dialogue.
So
And so
true.
one of the things you talked about earlier, you kind of touched on it, was about people's lifestyles. And one of the people that I speak with a lot are the chronic dieter. And if I'm someone who is a chronic dieter, is that a potential for me to have a red flag for osteoporosis down the line?
That's a great question. And for me, I would have to know more details of how
Okay.
they're doing the diet, because diet is there's not just one
It's
way to diet. I
relative.
think,
Yeah.
calorie restriction
Yes.
is a documented risk factor for
This is
osteoporosis.
like ultra calorie restriction.
Absolutely. Nutritional deficiencies, not getting enough protein, those are definite risk factors for osteoporosis. And I might add that when it comes to diet, what I'm a fan of is really, and I'm sure you are as well, teaching people the dietary pattern, the healthiest dietary pattern for them to follow, to eat for their health, to promote their health for the rest of their
Yeah.
life. So they're off of this, what's often this yo-yo effect of this diet, and then they just bounce back up and gain even more weight back.
Right. And so, um, So you talked about like lifestyle. So we talked about sleep and stress. Those two are kind of, I always tell people, are like the two biggest things that if most people dealt with those two things, a lot of other health issues, including osteoporosis, would not be as prevalent in our society as they are. What are some of the reasons why, stress impacts bone health?
Oh, I love that you brought this up because it's not talked about enough. And it's
No.
definitely not talked about enough by physicians. And what we know is the stress response. Short-term stress is adaptive. It can help us focus, it can help us escape a dangerous situation. But too many people are under chronic long-term stress. And that wreaks havoc on your health, not just increasing the risk for cardiovascular disease and dementia and diabetes and obesity and insomnia, but yes, also osteoporosis. What happens is that prednisone glucocorticoids are the medications I mentioned before that damage bone.
Mm.
Prednisone is a very common one, but we produce our own natural glucocorticoids, one of them being cortisol. And cortisol is anti inflammatory, which is very helpful in the short term. But in the long term, it also has similar effects to the prednisone type medications in terms of damaging bone. Not only does it strip the bone of minerals, but it damages collagen and makes collagen stiffer. And
Mm.
stiff collagen is more fragile collagen, and it reduces our body's ability to create more collagen. And so that those combinations of effects, even when somebody doesn't have a disease where they have elevated cortisol beyond the normal level, even within the normal range of cortisol, that has been shown to increase how fast somebody loses bone. There was a study that was done where they took healthy adults and they tested their cortisol, and those that were towards the high end of normal had faster bone loss than those who had
Mm.
lower levels of cortisol.
And it's very interesting because you're right. I think, I had a physical a couple months ago, and I think to myself, the questions that they asked me, and I don't think she ever asked me about stress. I
They
don't think.
don't. And even if they ask about that, sometimes what they're not asking about in terms of lifestyle is engagement, community engagement, being connected to other people,
Mm.
because that has been shown not only to reduce the risk of all cause mortality, that is death from any cause, including
Hmm.
osteoporosis, but if somebody were to fracture and end up in the hospital, having a strong social network is
Yeah.
associated with faster and better healing. And we know that being connected to other people and being engaged raises the happy chemical oxytocin,
Right.
and that brings down cortisol. It lowers cortisol. So it's important to understand what people are doing, in terms of their life and how they're approaching it,
Right.
that is causing them to have high levels of chronic stress. But I think equally important is to not just send a patient off and say, well, just do some stress reduction,
Yeah.
because it's not prescriptive enough. It's too vague.
Yeah.
And I like to be very specific with patients to give them some things to try. And look, it's not a one size fit all. This is very
Mm.
customized of what resonates with each person and each person's abilities and lifestyle and other commitments and what they can do. But there is something for everybody in terms of being able to reduce stress, not just lifestyle changes and improving sleep, because that's a stress on the body, not having enough sleep, and has been shown to increase osteoporosis and fracture risk. But also supplements. There's some dietary supplements that help with adrenal support and can help calm the nervous system down to better handle stress, so it's
Right.
not as jarring to the system.
So, speaking of supplements, there's like, I want to say there's like, for especially for bone health, the two that you've heard about probably your entire life, calcium and vitamin D. Those are like the two kind of like superstars of bone health that you hear about. Are those the superstars that we've been led to believe, or has their research shown that not so much?
The way that I answer this question about dietary supplements or any recommendation that's been given is similar to how I answer and approach the question of the bone density test and how valuable that is. So, the question that I teach people to ask when they're hearing somebody recommend something is, has it been shown to maintain bone strength
Mm,
by showing that it reduces fractures? Because that's the most important indicator of if you have strong bones. So there are clinical trials that are designed not just to detect bone density, but to
gotcha.
look at fractures and determine if an intervention actually reduces fractures. So for calcium and vitamin D, they're okay. And I think it's important to consider those, but we're looking at about an 18 to 23% reduction in fractures. And the challenge I have with those nutrients and how they tend to be discussed and dosed is as if it's a one size fits all.
Mm,
So I'm a fan of testing vitamin D. And what we know is that when the vitamin D is the result is 30 to 44 on a test, that is associated with the maximum hip fracture reduction.
mm,
So testing your vitamin D, it fluctuates throughout the year depending on your latitude and the season, and making sure you're supplementing when you need it. And a lot of doctors like even higher, 50, 60, 70 for immune health, but for bone health is that 30 to 44 range that's important to make sure you're in. And when it comes to calcium, I think most people are getting way too much.
mm.
The US RDA for calcium is 1,200 milligrams a day for women and 1,000 milligrams a day per men. Many clinicians are still recommending 1,000, 1,200 milligrams of calcium as a dietary supplement. But the recommendation for how much you should get is based on all sources, diet and dietary supplements.
Gotcha.
The average American woman consumes about 800 milligrams of calcium in her diet. So
Mm,
just getting another 400 milligrams from a dietary supplement is enough. And
right.
getting more than that, like an extra 1,000 or 1,200, starts to get her into a range where it could be dangerous. You don't want to get more than 2,000 to 2,500 milligrams of calcium per day from all sources. And the average American man gets about 1,000 milligrams of calcium from their diet. So men typically don't need extra calcium as a dietary supplement. And so
And
that's how I approach calcium and vitamin D. It's not a one size fits all.
right. And and you mentioned collagen, and that now has become the darling of the supplement industry.
Mm-hmm.
Is that is the calcium that people are intaking, is that going to support my bones, or is that supporting some other processes in my body, or is that just junk?
Well, calcium is used for a lot of different. You're talking about calcium, right?
No, I'm sorry.
Specific collagen. No,
Collagen. Thank
that's
you.
okay. Hydrolyzed collagen is absorbed in the body. Types 1 and 3 collagen are what are typically found in products, or type 2 collagen. It's the type 1 collagen that is specifically in bone. 90% of bone collagen is type 1 collagen. And there are clinical trials showing that it improves bone density. There are no studies looking at fractures as the outcome, and we can
Gotcha.
build our own collagen. We can manufacture it. So I go back to that protein question in diet.
Mm,
If you can get it from diet, you're better off.
yeah, yeah.
I look, I have a supplement company. I created a collagen product specifically for bones, but I do recommend people start with diet first,
Yes.
always. And a
Mm-hmm.
supplement should be used as the FDA intended, which is a supplement to a healthy diet. So the minimum amount of protein that I recommend people get is based on their body weight. And if you take your body weight and multiply it by 0.6, that gives you the number of your body weight in pounds times 0.6. That gives you the number of grams of protein that you should be minimum that you should be consuming a day, unless of course you have chronic kidney disease and you have to be on a low protein diet. And then the dietary supplements like a protein powder or collagen, are used to bridge that gap, because when you're giving
Right.
your body those raw materials, it can produce the collagen. But yes, dietary supplements, the collagen dietary supplements have been shown to improve bone density, but there are other nutrients that for me are first line. That collagen is not first line. There are other nutrients that have been shown, repeatedly, in actually one other nutrient in clinical trials, not only to improve bone density but maintain strong bones by reducing fractures in women with postmenopausal osteoporosis.
And what was that nutrient?
That is MK4, which is a
Mm.
specific form of vitamin K2.
And
There are different forms of vitamin K2.
and what food group does that normally hang
Well,
out in?
it's produced by mammals, so you can get it in dairy and meat, but only in very, very small amounts. The amount you cannot get the clinical trial doses
Gotcha.
in food. You can only get it through dietary supplement. And the clinical trial dose of the MK4 is 45 milligrams per day. Most of the supplements out there with vitamin K, first of all, don't have the type of vitamin K shown to work. They have
Right.
different types of vitamin K. So you have to make sure it's MK4. And the only dose that's been shown to reduce fractures in clinical trials is 45 milligrams per day. And in terms of bone density, MK4 plus vitamin D3, combining those two,
Mm.
were superior than MK4 alone. They have synergistic effects at improving bone density.
Neat, neat. Like that's good to know because when you said you can't get it from dairy, in my mind, I think about like you go to the grocery store and you see the entire dairy counter, and you're like, "I'll take it all, please," and see if we can get that.
Yeah,
Oh,
and I do want to say, just to be very specific, because I love data and I love numbers and I love research, that the MK4 45 milligrams per day in clinical trials were showing over 70% reduction in
oh
fractures.
wow, that's pretty impressive.
It's huge.
Yeah. Um.
And this was an issue, frankly, that I encountered. I talked a little bit about my story and how I got into this with my, 20 years ago with my mother-in-law. And so when I dove into the research, I discovered that nutrient. This has been approved by the Ministry of Health in Japan since 1995. It's not new. And there have been more and more studies even since then showing how safe it is and how well it works and how, its uses in the body. But it didn't exist, and that is why I created my dietary supplement to produce these products that I needed for my patients and had the clinical trial doses of nutrients that I needed to help them that didn't exist in other products. So I was the first one to bring it over in the clinical trial dose into the U.S. And now there are 3 different versions of the product, all with the MK4 45 milligrams per day, and vitamin D, and just different amounts of calcium, because like I mentioned, it has to be customized. Not everybody
Mm,
needs the same amount, even a calcium free version,
right.
all guaranteed to work.
Perfect. And so now, if I'm a woman listening to this show, and what are 3 things I can do starting today to improve my bone health and reduce my risk of fracture?
All right. So the first thing is, if you haven't had an assessment done, to get an assessment done to understand your risk. So first, that's a great baseline. If it's appropriate to get a bone density test, get a bone density test. If you can go, there's a free online tool called Frax, Frax. You can put in some data there. It's very limited, but it'll give you some. It asks for some medications, for example, like prednisone, but it doesn't ask if you're taking other medications like antidepressants or acid blocking medications. So, like I said, there's not one great test. It's about just piecing things together. Your strength, and are you able to get up unassisted from a seated position on the floor without using your hands, just standing up with
Mm,
just your legs? I like that test. That's not something I've seen in the
yeah.
research, but I like that. It really shows if somebody's strong. That circumference of your thigh circumference muscle is associated with longevity and being healthy. And so strength is important. Are you exercising? Are you
Mm,
getting good, healthy sleep? About 7 hours of sleep that's quality, deep sleep. Are your hormones balanced? Are you managing stress? Have you done a medication review? It's not an easy, simple question. So understanding that baseline and then creating a plan is very important. Anybody who's concerned about their bone health because of the clinical trials on the nutrients, if they're taking vitamin D or calcium or considering it, taking one of my OsteoK products to me is just non-negotiable for
yeah.
almost everybody, because of the strength of the research
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
because of the benefits physiologically of how those nutrients promote bone health, and not just bone health, but neurological health and immune health and health throughout the body, because all nutrients are used for many different things, not just in this case for bones. And I would really say get a copy of my book, and that's not just to promote my own work. It is the only one that I'm aware of that really walks people through the questions to ask their doctors about the medications to make sure they're getting the best advice about their own medications that they may be taking, but questions about the osteoporosis medications, how to think about exercise and create an exercise program, how to think about how much sleep do you need and what are things you can do to minimize sleep destroyers, and
Mm.
what's the research on social networks, and getting involved in things, and what's the clinical trials on the nutrients, and uh, just chapter by chapter.
And just, we kicked off the show and you literally just like rattled off like an encyclopedia of things where I knew that, if someone to break their hip, it's pretty catastrophic, but I didn't realize that it wasn't at a, it was even now can be catastrophic for some people. And it's been, everything you've said has just been very eye-opening. So I can only imagine the aha moments I would have reading your book, from starting probably at page one until all the way through the end. So absolutely, guys, I'm going to link in the show notes. I will link his book. I will also link his supplement company as well, because I know I get a lot of questions about vitamin D and that kind of thing, and I'm always grateful to find folks like Dr. John here who have quality product, because there's a lot of crap out there and I don't want you wasting your money on crap. um so I ask everyone one thing that makes them feel magical, and what would be your one thing?
I think this interview is an example of it, and that's connecting with other people, helping to share information. We're all in this together.
Mm,
And I'm a big believer of us all helping each other to live more vibrant, full, wholesome lives, so we can show up better every day for
yes.
ourselves, for our families, for our communities, and all contribute our unique gifts to the world. And so these sorts of things help me to feel alive and vibrant and connected. And I'm just, again, so grateful that you invited me on.
No, I'm grateful that you are here, and you've given me a lot of, I'd like conversations that bring multiple perspectives to something that we've only given a couple of pat answers to from our doctors or just even in social media. So I'm grateful that, you are an expert, and, your mother-in-law was like, what's going on? And you're like, hang on. And you felt that you needed to dig a little deeper to figure out how you can best support her and other women in your life and other women in the world. And where can people find you on the socials?
Thank you for asking. The best way to find my work is through my website, nbihealth.com. NBI stands for Nutritional Biochemistry Incorporated, nbihealth.com. And our social media channels are linked on there. Tons of free articles, lots of information. Use a little search icon in the upper right. You can just search for something you're interested in. Likely, there's an article that I wrote on there. The book is on the website. My products are on the website. And you can always reach me through the website as well.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. And Magic Makers, do me a favor. If there was like an aha moment that you got out of this podcast, do me a favor, screenshot this and make sure to tag both of us on any social media that you are on. And do me a favor, share this with a friend. And I'm not just talking a 40-something-year-old friend. Share this with your daughters. It's now time for us all start to really focus in on our bone health before we have to play catch up. All right. I will talk to you guys next week and have an amazing day.